Good evening. You're watching The Big Story with Haryan Terjemahan. I'm Olivia Quay. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
We begin with the latest figures in Singapore. The Health Ministry confirmed 151 new COVID-19 cases today, the lowest daily figure since April 11th when 191 cases were announced. There are 2 community cases today, both work pass holders.
Migrant workers living in dormitories make up the majority of the other cases, and while Singapore has just under 41,000 cases in total now, the daily average of community cases has dipped since Phase 1 began on June the 2nd, from 9 cases 2 weeks ago to 8 in the past week.
Singapore moves to Phase 2 of its safe reopening this Friday with retail and F&B businesses given the green light to take in customers. Detailed guidelines on how to do so were issued just today. Among others, businesses must prevent crowds and long queue from building up within and around their premises and be able to collect information for contact tracing.
The rules sound simple enough. Keep a safe distance of at least 1 meter and no more than 5 people in a group. So are retailers ready to welcome customers after being closed for more than 2 months?
To answer this question and more, we are now joined by President of the Associate of Small and Medium Enterprises, Kurt Wee. Kurt, it's so good to have you back. Kurt, how are the retailers taking the announcement that they will be allowed to resume operations starting Friday? I suppose a mix of relief and excitement as they prepare to reopen their businesses?
Well, I think businesses are having a mix of relief and uncertainty. I think relief because finally they can get some level of operations into commencement, and some level of uncertainty because they will be looking forward to how the market responds, and it's something which businesses will be pretty nervous about. As you understand, there will be various safe distancing guidelines, health and safety guidelines, and they have to adhere to that, and that caps their turnover. And much as they are trying to pivot and find digital revenues as well, digital lines of revenue, they won't be able to hit back to old levels of revenue. So it'll be about a good 2-4 weeks of run-in for a lot of businesses as they get their new processes in place. And I think thereafter they can focus about how they can drive top lines higher and higher. We are advising businesses to place their first priority on safe management, safe distancing, social distancing, managing to have a safe and a healthy environment, both for their customers and also for their employees as well. And that's really, really vital to make sure that we don't have a recurring wave of infection going forward.
Right. On that point, Kurt, now that restrictions will be eased further, crowds of people are expected to swarm shopping malls and retail outlets as soon as this weekend. How will retailers adhere to the 1 meter 5 people rule? And do you know of some of the things that they are doing?
Well, before the circuit breaker, I think a lot of retailers and restaurant operators have actually already commenced a social distancing implementation and segregation and distancing measures in place. And between then and now, there's a lot more advisory information help that businesses have access to in this area of implementations. So I think businesses this round will be a lot more ready. It's not just about social distancing a customer. It's about contact management. It's about having queue management in place. It's having a safety, health and safety officer designated within your establishment, so that if there's any uneventuality, it can be there's a good process immediately that can kick in. What's your sanitization or disinfection protocols, things like that. So I think businesses this round are a lot more informed and equipped with the right information. We are continuing to blast this information out to the SMEs out there, and so that those that may still be not very clear about it would find a better level of clarity and implement these measures.
Kurt, on that note, are the retailers provided with some form of detailed guidelines, like you mentioned earlier on, right, on the resumption of their businesses, or are they even working with landlords or associations to come up with one?
Certainly, we are seeing landlords that are, really implementing disinfection and sanitization solutions for their malls. For example, Star Reed Mall, as we understand, they are implementing this robotic disinfection from one of our SME co-op store at Wisma Asia. And so the robot basically go around disinfecting the whole environment. And at the SME tenants end, I think they're also working with the landlords to make sure there is crowd management, queue management, between customers, they are distancing. Things like having a table not more than 5 people, I think those things are pretty straightforward and easy to implement for businesses.
Yeah.
And it's really a question for businesses is in terms of where their revenue water level is going to be at after 2 or 4 weeks, and how they are going to be able to get to a level of viability in this new normal.
Now, in the Multi-Ministry Task Force press conference yesterday, National Development Minister Lawrence Wong advised the businesses to not rush into resuming their operations. Let's take a listen.
I can understand many businesses are very keen to reopen and would like to do so as quickly as possible. But if they were to rush into this without adequate preparations, they put themselves at risk, they put their customers at risk, they put their staff at risk. Clusters were to break out, the entire business will have to be closed all over again. So it doesn't help them to rush into this without adequate preparations.
So, Kurt, we've heard from Minister Lawrence Wong saying that businesses shouldn't rush into restarting their business or their operations. Apart from businesses playing their part, what role can shoppers play to help make the transition smoother?
I think first of all, before we get to the shoppers, I want to say that there have been a lot of industry level efforts to really develop safe distancing, health and safety guidelines, and getting their establishments to implement these as standard operating procedures. I saw that with the optical shop, about 100 of them came together to do that. I saw about over 100 spa and wellness group that came together to get their health safety practice in place. And just this couple of days, there were about over 100 KTV operators that are gathering to sort of develop this for themselves as well. So even before the reach of the phase for them to open, a lot of businesses have been in the preparatory stage. And I think it's a very, very good sign, because then it shows a level of priority and seriousness by business owners, that they are aware of the importance of this, and that they only have one chance to get this right, so that we don't go and have a reverse situation going forward. Then at the shoppers end, I think it's important that shoppers don't go crazy and don't go shopping or go eating with a vengeance. And I think it's important for shoppers to also space out in time and pace out your consumable appetite, so that the malls are not overcrowded. Cooperate with all the malls and all the retail F&B establishments, safety guidelines and distancing measures. Service will be slow. The shops will only be able to attend to limited customers at one time, limited number of customers at one time. So shoppers have to really pace out their appetite and really be patient, and also work with the rules and the practices as well.
Well, thank you so much, Kurt. It's always a pleasure having you on the show. We were speaking to ESME President Kurt Wee on whether retail shops are ready to reopen in Phase 2 this Friday.
In other news, the mega Changi Airport Terminal 5 project will be paused for at least 2 years due to the uncertainty on how the COVID-19 pandemic will change the aviation sector. Transport Minister Koh Boon Wan said today the government is currently studying how the sector will change. He added that the design of T5 will have to change to take into account new safety requirements. T5 was originally scheduled to be completed around 2030. Air travel has all but grounded to a halt because of the pandemic. In April, Changi Airport handled just 25,200 passenger movement, a 99.5% drop from last year. In response, Changi Airport Group shut down T2 for 18 months for upgrading works. It also closed T4 temporarily to save costs.
For the first time in Singapore's history, more than 1,000 dengue infections were recorded in a single week. There were 1,158 cases last week, a 33% increase compared to the previous week. As of yesterday, the total number of infections for the year was 11,166. The National Environment Agency said it's possible that the total dengue infections for this year could set a new record high, exceeding the 22,170 cases in 2013.
Technology company Grab is cutting 363 jobs, or 5% of its headcount, amid the economic fallout from the COVID-19 crisis. In a note to employees which was posted on Grab's website, co-founder Anthony Tan said that the company has tried its best to avoid the cuts. He added it has cut back on its discretionary spending after review, but it needed to become leaner as an organization in order to tackle the challenges of the post-pandemic economy. Mr. Tan reassured his employees that this will be the last organization-wide layoff this year. For global headlines, let's go to Dilanang.
Thanks, guys. An estimated 1.7 billion people, or more than 20% of the world's population, risk becoming severely infected with COVID-19 due to underlying health problems like obesity and heart disease. The findings, revealed in a study by a team of experts from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, believe that the coronavirus adversely affects patients suffering from such conditions. While not all of those will go on to develop severe symptoms if infected, researchers said around 4%, or 350 million, would likely get sick enough to require hospital treatment. New Zealand confirmed 2 new cases of the coronavirus, both related to recent travel from the UK. The country declared itself free of the virus and had lifted all social and economic restrictions last week, but had warned that new cases might emerge in the future as New Zealanders return home. Both cases are connected. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration revoked its emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19, the drug championed by President Donald Trump. The FDA said new evidence suggests that it was no longer reasonable to believe that oral formulations of hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine may be effective in treating patients. The US had authorized its emergency use in March at the height of infections, based on the belief that its anti-inflammatory and antiviral properties might help treat COVID-19. And those are the global updates. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Dylan. Now, over in China, Beijing authorities imposed more restrictions to stop the spread of a fresh COVID-19 outbreak to other provinces, including banning outbound travel of high-risk people and suspending other transportation services out of the city. It comes as officials reported 27 new cases in Beijing today.
The Straits Times China correspondent Elizabeth Law joins us from Beijing. Elizabeth, a two-part question to start. How big of a setback is this in Beijing's economic recovery, and do you think the city can avoid a full-scale lockdown?
All right, hi Yan, hi Ollie. So to take the question, this two-part question, but I'm going to answer it together in a sense. So I think I'll answer the second part first. Can the city avoid a full-scale lockdown? Well, the answer is that they are trying to, because this obviously is quite closely linked to the economic recovery. Because as we saw, nearly full lockdown, stoppage of production in earlier this year in January and most of February has already led to the sort of economic impact that we're seeing today. For the first time ever in China's history, we saw negative GDP growth in the first quarter. And when they released the work report, the annual work report, usually setting targets for GDP, there was no GDP target this year. So that already shows how much of an impact just 1 month of a lockdown has had on the economy. And furthermore, I think there is the political implications of it as well, because this is the capital city. This is the political and cultural and business, well, not exactly business heart is Shanghai, but this is pretty much the center of power for China. To have a lockdown in Beijing really would have a lot of implications, and clearly authorities are keen to avoid it. To go back to the first part of your question, I mean, whether or not this is possible to avoid. Clearly, they are doing everything that they can. There is very targeted testing in areas that are being affected by this, which means the markets, which means residential areas surrounding the markets, and even schools that are close to markets that cases have surfaced. So hopefully we can avoid going into a lockdown.
Right, so let's go to the man on the street, Liz. What has the general reaction to the government imposing restrictions again?
Right. So as someone described it to me yesterday, it's as though you have taken 3 steps forward and are now taking 2 steps back. It feels a bit disheartening. Some restaurant owners have told me that the moment new cases surface, and in the capital city as such, their businesses over the weekend were down 50%, which is quite a lot, because we're pretty much back to normal now. You're dining out in restaurants, you're visiting people at home, and now to go back to this sort of semi-lockdown mode where everyone is living in a bit of fear again has been very difficult. I think the equivalent of this in Singapore happening, how people are feeling, is as though this Saturday, right after phase 2 kicks in, the government suddenly says, okay guys, we're going back to circuit breaker mode.
Right. Liz, with Beijing's new infections being traced back to a wholesale food market, it brings up comparisons to Wuhan, where the virus spread from the Huanan Seafood Wholesale Center. I understand you've been to the market in Beijing. Was it surprising or not that another market will be the source of another outbreak?
No, so I have not been to the market in Beijing, because if I were, I would be under quarantine now. I have been to the market in Wuhan, certainly a few times, in fact. But why markets have been, I've spoken to a few epidemiologists and public health experts as well, and they say the reason why markets tend to be in a way a hotspot for such infections to spread is simply because it's hot, it's sweaty, people are in close contact. These are quite clustered together places. So generally, even if it were a flu or cold, it can spread quite easily in such markets. So what we're seeing on the screen are images from this morning, where I visited another wholesale market that is still running in Beijing. This is the Dayanglu wholesale market in southeast Beijing, whereas the market where the outbreak first surfaced is the Xinfadi, which is in southwest of Beijing. So now that large wholesale markets have closed down, they're moving to smaller places like Dayanglu, which are slightly smaller scale than Xinfadi, which is largest market in Beijing. But also authorities obviously are leaving nothing to chance. I was chased out of the market, not by security officials, but by storeholders who said that, look, we have to get out of here. You have to get out of here, because health authorities are coming in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to do a thorough disinfection of the place, and all of them have had swabs taken for nucleic acid tests to test for coronavirus.
Well, reports say that more than 200,000 people have visited the Xinfadi market since May the 30th. Even with contact tracing and mass testing of those living in the market's vicinity, how high is the risk of the virus being transmitted out of the city?
Right. So to give you an idea of how big this market is, when they said that they were testing staff and and people who had been to the market, there was something like about 8,000 people as of yesterday, which is huge. This market is massive. There is no way you can get around the market without a car. I do not view it as an equivalent in Singapore. So the fact that it's also the biggest market in Beijing and in the surrounding region means that people do come here to purchase their goods, to procure things for restaurants, for supermarkets around the region, which includes Hebei and Tianjin. And so what we've seen over the last few days is that cases are showing up as far away as Liaoning province, which is about 700 kilometers away. So one is because of what I said earlier, that people come here to procure goods. And the other reason also is that, like most of Beijing, the market is being staffed by migrants from the surrounding regions. And given that it was the weekend, some of them might have gone home to see their family, and therefore that is how the virus has spread.
Right. Well, that was our China correspondent, Elizabeth Law. Thanks so much for coming on the show once more, Liz. It's back to Dylan for what's also in the news.
US President Donald Trump is set to sign a police reform executive order today that will seek to improve how police officers treat the public, particularly African Americans. Officials said that this will be done by improving training and mental health resources. The order comes after Trump struck a strict law and order tone in his response to protests around the country, sparked by the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Still in the United States, the US Supreme Court delivered a landmark victory for the gay and transgender communities on Monday when it ruled that employers cannot discriminate against workers because of their sexual orientation. The 6-3 ruling represented the biggest movement for LGBT rights in the United States since the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in 2015. Back home, the Reform Party introduced 6 candidates for the upcoming Singapore general election via a Facebook live stream last night. Of the 6, 3 will be contesting for the first time. They are criminal defense lawyer Charles Yeo, assistant property manager Gurdev Singh, and oil and gas company director Mahabub Bacha. The other 3 are party chairman Andy Ju, Madam Noraini Yunus, and Mr. Darren So. They were part of the 5-man team led by Mr. Kenneth J. Ratnam that contested in West Coast GRC in 2015, a constituency that Dr. Tan Cheng Bok's Progress Singapore Party is eyeing. That was what's also in the news. I'm Dylan Ang.
Thanks, Dylan. And those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.